Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and today is July the 14th, 2021, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. July 14th is Bastille Day. Bastille Day, the day that the French Revolution started, the day they stormed the Bastille. If you remember from your reading of A Tale of Two Cities, Madame Defarge was sitting in front of the Bastille day after day, and she was knitting the names of the people that were going to wind up at the guillotine eventually. Well, that's why we have Bastille Day. And Bastille Day, interestingly, is there's quite a few celebrations around the country here. A couple of places in New York, Sacramento, parts of the South. And over the years, there's been a celebration in Philadelphia. It just stopped a couple of years ago. But it took place at one of these big prisons. And what they used to do is, the tasty cake makers, they would throw out these tasty cakes. Now, if you recall, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake," and we all think of them eating a birthday cake or something. Well, that's not what we're talking about. And in fact, tasty cake got it completely wrong. When you're baking bread in an oven, in a brick oven, the flour the particles of flour that come off the bread and sort of filter out and settle on the side of the oven. That's the cake that she's talking about. When she said let them eat cake, she's talking about the scraping the bread particles off the side of the oven. So it wasn't a birthday cake. And in the celebration in Philadelphia for the last 30 or 40 years, they've had it completely wrong. So that's what it was. It was let them eat cake. It was the built-up flour that was in the oven. A few years ago, we took a trip to Europe, and to tell you the truth, I didn't even want to go, and I sort of felt like I was going just to carry the luggage for the wife. It turned out to be one of the best things I've done in my entire life. It was an absolutely marvelous trip, and we started off in England. We did a tour, and it was on a bus, and we went from England through Amsterdam, through Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, and France. And when we crossed the border into France, there wasn't even a sign, "Welcome to France." Suddenly I started crying, honest to God. And it was the wheat fields in France. This was way before the city, way out in the outskirts. And it just felt like Oklahoma on steroids. That's the way it felt to me. And I literally started crying on the bus as we entered France. So we spent a couple of days with our tour, and then the tour was over, and we spent a couple of extra days in Paris, and we stayed at the Left Bank, the Hotel Left Bank, which is the oldest hotel in Paris. I think it's been there since 1640s. Next door was a restaurant where Jean-Paul Marat and Robespierre ate, and the beams in the room these beams were like huge beams in the ceiling, and they were literally been there since 1600. Unbelievable experience. Well, the big part of the trip for me, when we went over to Notre Dame, we got out of Notre Dame and we went across the street on the other side of the Seine River, and there's the Paris bookstore. Let me show you. Well, let's just move over here for a second. Shakespeare and Company, not the Paris bookstore. Shakespeare and Company is the name of the bookstore. Shakespeare and Company. And this marvelous bookstore, and it had connections to Ferlinghetti from City, who just died this year. Lawrence Ferlinghetti from City Lights Books in Paris. There was sort of a camaraderie between the two bookstores. I went into the bookstore, and it was one of the most intellectually enjoyable experiences my entire life. And I wound up being educated by a young 20-year-old philosophy major who was turning me on to Alain Boutin, philosopher in France who I'm not the least bit familiar with. He said he was very popular throughout Europe. We're a little bit behind the times here in America when it comes to intellectual pursuits. I really enjoyed the time there, and what happened was, my one line I would use, my name is French, Duchesne, And the line I've been using my whole life, I'm terrible learning languages. I've tried to learn French a few times. It just doesn't work well for me. But m'appelle est français, mais je ne parle français, which means my name is French, but I don't speak French. By using that, when I was in Paris, if I ran into somebody and I needed to ask somebody, I would start off by saying, m'appelle est français, m'appelle est Duchesne, mais je ne parle français. And they would be immediately helpful. They would walk around blocks and show me things. I mean, once you gave a little bit that you cared about the language, they cared a lot more about you. And that's sort of the way it was for me there. So that was a really nice experience there. All my experiences in Paris were absolutely marvelous. It felt to me like it was the last bastion of Western civilization. And literally, I was born and raised in New York. And New York is a pretty nice city. Well, New York in the 50s was a really nice city. As we've progressed and the buildings have gone up and the city's gotten more crowded, it's not such a nice city anymore, which is why I say that Paris is probably the last bastion of Western civilization. So having said that, back in, well, let me get this other picture up. Okay, yeah, let's get this. This was the, back in November, the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, they were, because of the virus, they weren't getting a lot of business. People weren't walking around. They weren't getting a lot of business, and they put out an appeal for help. Well, I went to the website, and I figured, well, I'll buy a few books. I buy books, as you may know by now. And the first book that they had on the top of their on the top of the website was this book, Paris. And I said, well, how could I go wrong with a book named Paris? And you know, let's take this down. I'll put that up on a full screen maybe here for a second. I have it here. There it is. Okay, there's the book, and it's Hope Mirrlees wrote it, and it's called, on the front cover, it says, An Immersive Polyphonic Adventure. Paris, a Poem. We'll put it up to the side over here. Okay, so I got the book, and I start to read the poem. And this has got to be one of the most complex poems I have ever read. Now, the poem itself is almost 20 pages, 22 pages. And the notes are another 22 pages. So we've got a 22-page poem followed by these extensive notes. So if you're reading the poem, you literally need to go from where you are back to the notes to make sense of it. There's a lot of it is in French. Not all of it, but enough of it. And there are references to Greek mythology and Roman mythology and French history. There are obscure references throughout the whole thing. It opens, well, with the word, and this was really interesting, I want a hollow phrase. I want a hollow phrase. Well, the first word of the poem is fairly complex. And in the notes on the back, a hollow phrase, H-O-L-O-P-H-R-A-S-E. It's a single word standing for a complex of ideas. So a hollow phrase stands for a complex of ideas. And when she says I want, it can also mean I lack. So I lack the word that has a complex set of ideas that's going to explain this whole poem. I lack a hollow phrase. It could also be sort of like a joke, hollow phrase. So that's the opening of the poem. I want a hollow phrase. And it immediately jumps into a little bit of French, Nord-Sud. And they're talking about the north-south metro line in Paris. Well, the poem goes between, it follows her around Paris. And we're following her taking sort of a train ride on the north-south route and then the east-west route. She goes through various sections of Paris. She brings up historical references along the way. And we're walking around Paris. Now, this is about 1920. So this is post-World War I Paris. So World War I is over. So we've got the stench of death is in the air from World War One, preceded by a couple of other wars that were in France for the last hundred or so years. So there's a constant state of warfare going on. She brings this out. The poem itself, so what I did was, I copied the poem itself. I copied the poem, and then I went and I copied the notes to the poem. Copied the notes. Then I made a book, and I put the page from the poem with the notes that were next to it, so that I could then write in and make a completely new copy of my translation of the poem. So I copied the poem, I copied the notes of the poem, I then went back and I transcribed the notes, a lot of it was in French, onto the poem so I could read the whole poem. It was not an easy thing, but this was in the middle of the pandemic springtime, so I was sort of up for it. I had a few extra hours every night, and I really enjoyed doing it. I liked it quite a bit, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And there are a few lines in this poem that are absolutely blow your socks off, other than the opening of the poem right there. On page 2 of the poem, she does things. I guess what I'm doing is I'm not going to read this whole poem at all. It would not make any sense. It would be boring, and it wouldn't. I would have to translate every other word. It's something you need to do on your own. But I would highly recommend going out and getting a copy. It's only about $20, and if you like poetry at all, it's just absolutely marvelous. The poem has been compared to The Wasteland. It actually preceded The Wasteland by 2 years. Now, Hope Mirrlees apparently wrote 3 novels at the very least, and she has quite a few letters she wrote also. She's on the same kind of track as Virginia Woolf, and in fact, Virginia Woolf and Hogwarts Press are the original publishers of the poem. They printed it, the original versions, and Virginia Woolf sewed together by hand the original printing, the 150 copies, I think, which I did also. I sewed this together myself with thread by hand after I put this little book together. Some of the expressions in the poem are just absolutely I find to die for. Freud has dredged the river and grinning horribly waves his garbage in a glare of electricity. This is 1920. Freud has dredged the river and grinning horribly waves his garbage in a glare of electricities. Taxi, taxi, taxis, they moan and yell and squeak. This poem rings with, like she says here, polyphonic adventure, meaning a multi-voiced adventure. The sky is apricot. Against it there pass, across the Pont Solferino, fiacres and little people all black. Fiacres are these little coaches that, and when you look in the distance, you know, the French used to cut out little people like in these little black silhouettes, and they would do like a little theater piece with these kinds of things, and that's what they're talking about here. And this is a sort of an example of why you needed the notes in this poem here. Because it's just really very, very, like I said, very, very esoteric, very difficult. She brings in musical notes at one point. She stretches things out. The lettering she stretches out. Here, let's go here. The 1st of May. And here. So the poem is going along, and I don't know if you can see that up close. Yeah. You see how the words are going down the page? That's where she's slowing it down. Before that, when she was talking about the garden, the Tuileries, the Tuileries are in a trance because the painters have stared at them so long. And over there, they're in a trance. We're pointing over here, and you can see where she spaced the words apart, and it looks like it looks rather different than it would normally look. Let me get the Paris book off there, and we'll go back to 0. Okay. On and on the poem goes. So she's going through the town. She's visiting all these different spots. She's the wicked April moon, the silence of La Grave, which is La Grave is the when they go on strike in Paris. When they go on strike, there's a silent strike. Rain. The Louvre is melting into mist. It will soon be transparent, and though it will glimmer, the mysterious island gardens of the Place de Carrousel, the Seine, the old egotist meander imperturbably towards the sea, ruminating on weeds and rain. If through his sluggish, watery sleep come dreams, they are the blue ghost of King Fishers. The Eiffel Tower is two-dimensional, etched on thick white paper. And we're talking about that look that the French do with their little art things now and then, making the cutouts. Anyway, in general, I would highly recommend, if you're interested in a little immersive polyphonic poem, it says here on the back cover, an early modernist classic with clever plays on the classical and the modern. Mary Beard said that about the poem. A noisy, surreal vision of modernity, a rich snapshot of the city on the cusp of an unknown future. Rarely has the city so concretely become poem. Rarely has a poet's pacifist, feminist, anti-imperialist agenda found so elegant, inventive, and resourceful an outlet. Rarely has the city, Paris, so concretely become a poem. Rarely has a poet's pacifist, feminist, and anti-imperialist agenda found so elegant, inventive, and resourceful an outlet. There's a mouthful. And what she says here on the inside cover, Paris, a poem is a daring, dynamic, experimentally long poem by the British writer Hope Mirrlees. Set on a single day in post-World War Paris, this ambitious piece of modernist psychogeography brings alive the city's underground railroads and grand boulevards by means of playful typography, collage, and fragmentation. Hope Mirrlees, 1887 to 1978. She died in 1978. She's got a fairly religious little tilt going on here as she describes the city of Paris. She was a translator, a poet, and a novelist. Published 3 novels in her lifetime. And there's a biography that's been written by her and 3 volumes of poetry. Almost 20 minutes. Hope Mirrlees, Paris, a poem. I bought a few copies. I've given them out to a couple of people. I think it's, if you have any interest in literature, go out and get yourself a copy. You won't be disappointed. And today is the 14th of July. It is Bastille Day. And the other little thing about Paris that I frequently listen to is a song by Emma Stone from the movie La La Land. And I don't think I can. I better not play it. I wanted to play a couple of lines from it, but I better not. Anyway, it's called The Fools Who Dream. And I have the... I have a copy of it on my iPad, and frequently when I'm doing my yoga at night, I will listen to that particular song, and it's a real inspirational song. It's about a woman who jumps into the Seine River in the winter, freezing cold. She catches a cold, and it's sort of about taking a chance. And it's called The Audition. The Audition is the piece that it's called. If you looked up La La Land, it's called The Audition, and the actual name is The Fools Who Dream. And the poem is, and the song is about fools like myself who dream of things that are different, that could be. And I sort of put myself in the category. I am frequently a fool who dreams. And if enough fools out there start dreaming, maybe we can make something really dynamic happen. Peace, patience, persistence. We'll see you soon. Thanks for joining me. Have a great July 14th, Bastille Day.